Guaranteed, this is the absolute best thing you've ever put on bread. Today we're making the easiest homemade raspberry freezer jam. It only takes 3 ingredients and a couple of minutes, so let's get started. The biggest difference between jam that we're making today versus the one that you get at the grocery store is that this is a fresh jam. It's not going to be cooked in any way, and so it's going to have a much fresher, more delicious flavor, and it's going to be stored in the fridge or freezer. So like I said, you only need a couple of ingredients. So to start out, you need a box of pectin. This is the Sure Gel kind, and I do not get the low sugar kind, I get the full sugar. It's just better. It's jam, it's basically sugar anyway, but you have to get the regular kind. Since we're making raspberry jam, you also need fresh raspberries. So a couple times a year when raspberries go on sale to like under $3 for one of these large clamshells, I'll buy a bunch of them and make my jam for the year. So for this recipe, I need 2 of these bigger clamshells plus 1 pint. So I just used 2.5 of these. You also need a lot of sugar and just some water. So this jam is not like a family recipe. It's literally just the recipe that goes in the box, but you have to follow it pretty exactly. So first, take out the pectin from your box. It doesn't matter which brand you get as long as it's pectin for freezer jam. So I'm going to take out the instructions on here, and there's a lot of instructions. So you'll see on this side, there's a cooked jam side. We're not making cooked jam. I think cooked fruit, it just doesn't taste as good as the fresh raspberry jam. So if you want to make cooked jam with cooked fruit, you can do anything on this side, but you want to turn it around over so it's on this blue side. If it's your first time making jam, I definitely recommend that you read through this entire pamphlet. Just read the tips, the instructions completely, the supplies needed, and then since we're making raspberry, we're going down to the quick and easy freezer jam recipe section and then going to red raspberries. So in this column for the raspberries, it says 6 cups of fresh raspberries, and that's going to equal about 3 cups of mashed raspberries. The first thing I do is I always wash my raspberries, so I just use my salad spinner for that without spinning it. I'll put the raspberries in here and just let them soak for just a couple of minutes. And if you haven't already watched my berry hack video, make sure you watch that here. That is how to preserve your raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, any berry for up to 3 weeks. It's an amazing trick and so good, especially for raspberries because they mold super quickly. Once your raspberries are washed, you want to make sure that you pick out any gross raspberries that have any mold on them or that have leaves, bugs, dirt. You don't want any of that in your jam. From here, just put your raspberries in a large bowl. I like to do 1/2 of a large container like this. So if you buy them in individual packs, I like to just do 1 6-ounce package at a time to mash. So you will have the raspberries like this in a single layer. So I just take my potato masher like this, or you could use a whisk or a fork or something else to mash the raspberries in a single layer. I like to mash the raspberries in a single layer because then it makes sure that there's no large chunks of the raspberries and it just makes sure everything is smooth. Once the first layer of raspberries is nice and mashed, then add another 6 ounces of raspberries and then mash them on top of that. After you get all of your raspberries mashed, you need 3 cups total mashed. So as you can see here, I did not have quite enough with the 2 full containers of raspberries, so I had to add 1/2 of a container more. This was 2.5 full clamshells. Now in a separate bowl, I measure out the sugar exactly. So in this bowl, we have 5.25 cups of just plain white sugar. I know it seems like a lot of sugar, but it is jam, which is basically just fruit and sugar anyway. To the sugar, we want to add the 3 cups of mashed raspberries. I do this 1 cup at a time to make sure that it is perfectly exact, because if you are not exact with the instructions that came with your pectin, you can have issues with your jam not setting or firming up or gelling correctly. So you want to make sure everything is exact. So now I'm mixing the fruit into the sugar. So I'm trying to get as much of the sugar to dissolve as possible. After you mix up the sugar, you want to let this sit for at least 10 minutes. So I have my ThermoWorks time stick and I'm just going to set it down here and set this aside for 10 minutes. In the meantime, we are going to activate and make our pectin mixture. So we take our pectin from the box and the bag. I put it in a saucepan with exactly 3/4 cup of water, and then I follow the instructions as written. Bring this to a boil on high heat, stirring constantly, and then boil for for 1 minute and then remove from the heat. Now that the fruit has been sitting with the sugar and macerating for 10 minutes, we're going to add this hot pectin mixture into the bowl of raspberries and sugar. This will help dissolve the sugar a little bit more and just incorporate that pectin into the jam, making it jam. After you add the pectin to the sugar and the raspberries, you'll want to stir this for a minimum of 3 minutes or until all the sugar is dissolved and no longer grainy. If it's grainy going into the freezer, then it will be grainy coming out. All right, now it's ready to go into our containers. This is honestly so simple. So there's so many different things that you can do here, but I like to do fresh jam in smaller containers. That's my preference because if you let it sit in your fridge, it will go bad a lot faster than conventional jam. So I like to use smaller containers that I can pull from the freezer and just have in the fridge for a week or so before it goes bad. To do this, I like using the little mini mason jars that are like 4 to 8 ounces. You can really do this with any container that can either go in the freezer or that is airtight. I like to make sure that these containers are really nice and clean and sanitized before I add the jam. But here's the thing, we're not canning anything. We're not pressure canning, we're not boiling. This just goes straight into the container and then straight to the freezer. So it's really simple. It's really fine if it's not completely sterile like some other jams and canned things. So I'm just using a ladle to scoop the jam into the containers, and you want to make sure that you have a 1/2 inch of clearance from the top of the jam to the top of the container. Since it's going in the freezer, it will expand a little bit, so that 1/2 inch is really important. This jam recipe in particular makes 7 cups of jam, so 2.5 clamshells of raspberries made 7 cups of jam, and this will last us probably half a year. I usually do this about twice a year to make sure all of the family's jam's needs are met, and it's so amazing on homemade bread. This is a child's family tradition that I married into, and now every family gathering, we're all jam snobs, and we all have to have homemade fresh raspberry jam, none of that store-bought stuff. After you fill your containers, they just go here on the countertop and you let them set for 24 hours at room temperature. After that, they just go straight into the freezer and you can freeze until you're ready to use. If I'm only using a little bit of the jam, I will just use the jam straight from the freezer. So it's a little bit hard at first, but it's usually not too bad because it's mostly sugar. I will just scoop the frozen jam onto my hot bread or into a container or a recipe that I'm using, and then leave it in the freezer so it stays fresh as long as possible. But like I said earlier, we usually have one of these little guys in the fridge at all times because this will usually get used up within a week. This raspberry jam is so good. It just tastes like you have fresh raspberries from the summer all year long on toast, on French toast, any breakfast item, crepes, on top of ice cream. Like, we use this stuff for everything. It's also really good in mixed drinks, so I like mixing it with sparkling water as the sweetener with some lime and some mint, and that is an amazing drink during the summer. This jam lasts in the fridge about 2 to 3 weeks or up to a year in the refrigerator. It could not be simpler, and I promise this is the best jam you've ever had. So enjoy this and make sure you watch this video next, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.